Hello and welcome back to the Game Cupboard. I'm Rick, and with me again is Mr. Gabs, your friend.
Hello.
And mine. And today we're doing our spoiler talk for Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PlayStation 4. This isn't going to be a review. That was the last video, so if you want to see what our full thoughts on mechanics and music and gameplay and things are, then feel free to go and watch that. This is 100% a spoiler talk, so if you've not finished the game yourself, don't watch it. But if you have finished, you want to know our thoughts on the changes made to the story, elements like that, or if you're just not bothered by spoilers and want to see if this is something you want to play in the future, then please make yourself a cup of tea, get comfortable, because I think we're going to be here for a while. There's a lot to unpack with this game. So, where do you want to begin?
I think we should begin at the end. Just get that out of the way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, give me your thoughts on the end.
Let's just go balls deep in the ending into spoiler territory. I mean, I think, to be honest, like, you hit the nail on the head before even that Eurogamer video came out kind of explaining it. And I think, like, the way that you put it to me on WhatsApp at the time that we were playing it was, this is now the J.J. Abrams version. I don't know, I mean, you probably want to be able to own that, I think, if you want to.
Okay, so the Whispers, the little hooded ghosts, when it got into the point where it was like, oh, they're harbingers of fate, because like fate's predetermined, so they were trying to stop a deviation from fate, and then it all went weird at the end, and they kind of went Terminator 2, like there's no fate but what we make for ourselves kind of thing. I kind of realised, like, hang on, this isn't actually a remake of Final Fantasy, it's a sequel/reboot, in the same way that the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies are in the same universe but a splintered timeline to the original. Another good way to describe it is, this reminds me of Mortal Kombat 9. Raiden sent his memories back in time to the first tournament, and then that game story is the first 3 game stories, but with things changing. And it felt very much like that to me, that it was going into a direction now where I don't know what's going to happen in the second game, because I don't think it's going to be a remake of the rest of 7.
Yeah, so I think it's essentially giving Square Enix a creative license to now do what they want in the next game.
Yeah.
And I think it's a double-edged sword, really, because in one way, like, essentially what they're doing is allowing them to say, right, we can go and do what we want now, change what this is, which means that players can now experience something new the next time, and they don't know what's going to happen. Aerith isn't necessarily going to die. You know, all these kind of key events may or may not happen the way that you expected them to happen.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but I think, again, you know, they hit the nail on the head on that video, in that this is not why we wanted to buy a remake. We wanted to experience a story that we already knew in the greater fidelity. I mean, when we originally found out that this was actually going to be an episodic game in a way, I think many people were quite disappointed that it was like, okay, well, it's not just the first game, so the entire game is a single playthrough just with better graphics. And then, of course, you know, when we did actually play this remake, and then we realised, okay, actually, this is just Midgar, but, you know, they've managed to flesh it out into a full-on story that stands amazingly in its own right. But then we're like, well, that's fucking cool, because we can now go and play the rest of the game in this fidelity. It would be 3-4 games at this level of detail, which would be an insane amount of time for a playthrough, but, I mean, what a journey to be on. And I think, you know, there was so much that was so promising at this point that we were like, yeah, this could be absolutely amazing. And now they've kind of done this. It's like, well, okay, so now it's not the story, or at least it's no longer the story that we knew and loved.
It's not Final Fantasy VII anymore.
No.
It's Final Fantasy VII 2, or something like that. I don't like it. I didn't like the end of the game. I didn't like the changes made.
I didn't like the Whispers in general.
Yeah, the Whispers to me just kind of felt like the Heartless from Kingdom Hearts, which I know you haven't played.
No.
The end where all the Whispers formed a giant Whisper boss with little Whisper minions. That whole fight just felt very Kingdom Hearts. It looked like a villain from Kingdom Hearts. The only other thing in this game that was more Nomura than that is what Rufus was wearing. I fucking hated his costume, but we'll get to that in a bit. But the final fight was something straight out of Kingdom Hearts. And I've seen a lot of people online going, oh, if you compare it to Kingdom Hearts and you've never played Kingdom Hearts and you've never played Final Fantasy VII, shut up. Just stop. That end fight is straight out of Kingdom Hearts. It really is. The whispers are heartless, and I am just repeating myself. It annoyed me that much. The final fight against Sephiroth was weird as well, because it was just like watching Advent Children, but with menus overlaid on the screen. Like, that fight was the end of Advent Children.
But it's also very similar to the original Final Fantasy, but at the very end of the game.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, that was the end of Disc 3.
Yeah, and that was the thing that got my back up actually a bit, because I felt that throughout the game they shoehorned in Sephiroth too much anyway, because he doesn't really feature in Midgar very much. I mean, there's hints of him, which we'll get to when we talk about Shinra, but there are hints of Sephiroth and there's like references to him, but you don't find out about him really until you get to Calm. And I felt like in general they've really kind of shoehorned in a lot of Sephiroth there, because a lot of fans are going to want to see Sephiroth, and because, you know, he's such a great bad guy that, well, if he doesn't really appear for another few years until the next game, then it's going to maybe lose some appeal for some people. And I kind of felt like when they got to that final battle, that it was like, yeah, this is too soon. You're literally bringing in the final showdown between Cloud and Sephiroth now in Midgar. And I was kind of like, I'll accept this if this is sort of a predetermined thing, and that's kind of what they did. You know, it was sort of Sephiroth saying it's not time, and that's now allowed a level of foreshadowing for this to happen again later. So I would imagine the final showdown between Cloud and Sephiroth will still be the same. Now, I mean, my kind of issue with this is that, as you say, they're the harbingers of fate, and they're supposed to be the will of the planet, and then they decide to go to defy that will with the planet. Now, my kind of point of view on this is that, first of all, if this is the will of the planet, then why did it happen originally in the original game? Why were they not prevented from doing it the first time in that universe, that dimension?
I'm looking at it like, I'm probably looking too far into it, but I'm looking at it as like the life stream is kind of like the Speed Force from DC. It spreads all throughout time. It's the spirit, and the spirit of the planet is everywhere at once, you know. So I'm looking at it as something happened to Sephiroth, maybe even after Advent Children. I mean, the amount of music cues from Advent Children and stuff that was in there. Sephiroth, his conscience is in the live stream. Then there's nothing to stop him from coming back to where it all began. So, like, with Aerith at the beginning, when she's, like, flapping around because they're there, that they were trying to keep her there so Cloud could meet her. And then when they're at the church and she goes to fall off, they stop.
Yeah, they stop her,
But because Sephiroth's come back, because Cloud's seeing him when he shouldn't be seeing him, it's like a drip in a pond, you know. You change one thing and it just has this massive ripple effect. So the Whispers are trying to keep everything in line, even down to when you see Wedge when the plate's falling and he's surrounded by them because he's about to escape, but they're like, no mate, you've got to stay here, this is your fate to stay. And it's at the end when, like, the Shinra building, they're protecting it because, like, you need the Shinra building intact because later on the gun from Junon has to be attached to it to take out the weapon. It's Sephiroth being here when he shouldn't be here because he's got a knowledge of the future, so it is definitely future Sephiroth. And he's trying to change his own fate. That's what I'm looking at it.
Because I saw the whole thing of when they get all the foreshadowing of all the events that will happen, like Red 13 seeing an overgrown Midgar, like Aerith dying and all this kind of stuff, that they're like, this is what will happen if we fail. So I interpreted it as that the events of the original Final Fantasy VII is them failing, and they've now got to change and defy that fate. But then I'm like, well, if that's them failing, then why does the planet not want that? Because they succeeded in saving the planet in the last one, unless of course the will of the planet's actually to die and just say, no, we're done.
Again, I interpreted it as this is what happens if we fail here today, as in if we don't change fate, then that's what's going to happen. But even then, like, they save the planet, but Sephiroth comes back in Advent Children.
That's if you actually consider Advent Children to be canon. I don't. I just see it as a fun film that they just did for the sake of it. I don't see it as canon.
Advent Children's canon. In fact, this game uses clips from Advent Children in it. Those flashbacks, that Red 13 running with his cubs, that is the shot from Advent Children. When you see Cloud and Sephiroth facing off in the darkness, that's from the beginning of Advent Children. All those scenes of the future are these scenes that are used at the beginning of Advent Children. It is canon in the same way that Dirge of Cerberus is, and people really don't like that game. I do. It's a good game. Yeah. It's fine, but I enjoy it. But that's how I'm interpreting it. But I think calling it a remake when it's the beginning of a new story is
misleading.
Very misleading. Yeah.
I mean, the problem is that for most of this game, it is a remake. But
yeah.
But then again, it's only a remake of part of it. It's not even a remake of the whole game. So I think, you know, if they called it like Final Fantasy VII Midgar or something, then I think, you know, given it a different name, then it would have given them a little bit more license to do that.
Another thing that I really didn't like is the way that the president died in this. It took the mystery out. I've really enjoyed walking in the original game and just seeing him with the Sephiroth sword, whose name I can't remember. I guess I'm a fake fan now. But they just see him, that's the first real mention of Sephiroth and all that stuff. There was a lot of stuff in it that I did like. A lot of changes that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the fact that Avalanche get a backstory, as in Jessie, Biggs and Wedge. Specifically Jessie, seeing her story.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite heartbreaking, because it gave her more depth. Weirdly thirsty in this game, and Cloud's completely oblivious, but I think it gives her a bit more character. It makes her really likeable.
I loved Jessie in this game, and I think even though like you see the kind of person she is in the original, like you can see that she is a bombs expert, and you know she's really interested in like the fake IDs and like how the train system works, and it kind of they use that as a way to give narrative for how Midgar operates and how the Sexor system is and all this kind of stuff. That was always very cool, but like there wasn't really ever that much here, and I think she's really confident in this game, and she's similar to Tifa in a way. She really wants to help out the team. She really wants to make things work. I really love, as I say, her backstory. I think the story about her dad was heartbreaking. She's essentially the rich girl that's slumming it, like almost literally. Well, not rich. She's the middle class girl that decides to move to Hackney to kind of have that to live in a squat, you know, because that's the kind of the cool thing to do. And in some ways that, you know, normally I would kind of take the piss out of people like that, but because she really feels like she's joining a cause that she feels that she cares about, and she actually had the opportunity to have a career doing something that she really loved, but because of what happened to her dad, she had to basically put her career on hold and say no, actually, that, you know, there's way more important things going on now. And she's not really slumming it for kind of being edgy or anything. She's like, no, actually, I really need to join a cause here, and I'm going to join Avalanche.
Here's a question for you then about a big change that they made to Avalanche, which I'm on board with, but at the same time I'm not. The bomb. The first bomb does nothing. It does enough damage to disable the reactor in this. It is Shinra themselves who blow up the reactor and frame Avalanche, whereas in the original game, Avalanche did blow up the reactor. At first, I didn't like it. It made me think of the changes that Lucas made to Star Wars by making Han shoot first. It was taking a character but taking their agency away to make them more likable, and I didn't really like that at all. But then as the game went on and you realised that Shinra are using Avalanche as scapegoats, they're saying that they're allied with Wutai and they're trying to start the war again. But again, this is more of Nomura influence, because Crisis Core, one of the main story elements, is the war of Wutai. And it feels like that's kind of being shoehorned in. I would not be surprised if in the sequel we end up seeing Genesis. But what did you think to that particular change and how it's being used to set up another war?
I mean, in some ways I think I don't know if this is the right word, but it kind of removes the autonomy of Avalanche in a way. That actually they're not really that big anyway. They don't really have that much authority. They're actually nobodies. And as you say, they've just been convenient scapegoats that have allowed Shinra to kind of do what they want to. On the other hand, though, then it's like, well, why have they got the mayor on their side? There's actually references to Avalanche HQ, which I don't really recall that in the original game, if that was even a thing. I just think it was Barrett and his team.
Yeah, in the original game, it was Barrett, Jessie, Wedge, Biggs, and Tifa. In this, it's an actual militia. and there's different cells.
Yeah, they've actually got HQ, they've got the whole stamp graffiti, like they got some guy that you don't meet who puts the graffiti there to help people find their way around the train tracks. And and like the fact that they get like a helicopter to kind of extract them, and Wedge is like, oh, I had to ask them really nicely in order to kind of get them to extract you. As you say, it sounds like the end of there is actually really big. But then if that's the case, then why are these guys essentially nobodies, and why was there not more people involved if they had access to helicopters and stuff? I mean, I'm not that fussed about it really, like all things being considered, but the whole Shinra reaction thing, they really wanted to go for the scapegoats angle this time, and I think their bomb was like to disable them, and I think in this game that was also their intention. They were intending to just disable the reactor. They weren't intending to blow it up, and Jesse gets really upset about it, whereas if I remember correctly on the original game, they wanted to blow it up.
They just blow it up, They just destroy
and then
it.
They're like, that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of it, but I think all things being considered, I was happy to let that slide.
I think it worked for the sake of the story, and it worked for the sake of, again, going back to what I said in the previous video about what I enjoyed about Barrett, with him being less aggressive towards the other members. It made you realise that they're not bad people, they're just trying to do a good thing through bad means.
Yeah.
But
then that's all terrorism in some ways.
Yeah.
Say that
like
very
they
carefully.
They are terrorists. Well, that's the thing. I think it's changed them from terrorists to a legit militia.
Yeah.
In a way that before they were just a little terrorist cell, but now it does feel, again, referencing Star Wars again, it feels like the resistance or the rebellion against the Empire now, and they're just a little ragtag bunch like Luke, Han and Leia.
Yeah.
There was definitely more changes that I enjoyed. Like, I think the chapter with Airbuster, when you're running through the factory and you're seeing it moving to the final stage.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go, you just see it being transported and everything. You know that this huge battle's coming, and it's not going to be nice.
The trial of the eco-extremist group Avalanche.
What did you think to Wall Market? Probably the most fun area in the game.
Yeah, I loved everything about Wall Market. It really actually looks and feels like Wall Markets.
Yeah.
I don't like the music so much, but I love the Honeybee Inn. I love the fact that you can go through one of the keyholes and then you can actually see... Is it Palm?
It's Palmer, yeah.
Yeah, it's Palmer, and you see him being like chased around, which is exactly like reminiscent of if you go to like, Torture Garden in the early 2000s and you just wonder which politician's in the gimp mask,
I was a bit disappointed with the changes in the Honeybee Inn, because there's less rooms and there was less stuff to do or less stuff to spy on in the rooms. Because that room in the original, there's all this weird satanic shit going on in there, and then in brackets it's them whispering amongst themselves about all this weird shit that's happening. It's like, I think that they're in there with the president, and it's like, does his wife know about this? It's like, no, don't say anything. And then the infamous Cloud getting in the bath with all the men.
Yeah.
Which was removed. That's something else. There was a couple of things in this game that, when the remake was announced, I was like, I know for a fact they're going to remove this. That was one of them. Something else that I thought they'd take out, and they did, was the blood trail in the Shinra building. It was purple.
Well, I was going to get to that.
Oh, they also censored out Genova's nipples, which was quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, that pisses me off because in the UK it's rated 16, and I would imagine it's got similar ratings around the world. It's like, well, at the end of the day, like, you got 15 rated films or PG-13 or whatever where they've clearly got, more swear words, where they can say fuck and you can have nipples, it's like, look, they're not, this isn't a kid's game. It's not supposed to be a kid's game. I mean, yes, we know kids are going to play it, but the point is, what's the point in having an age rating system if people don't get some creative licenses?
Well, the original Final Fantasy VII is an 11 to 14, and that's got all the blood in it. That's got Genova's naked breasts. It's just weird that they changed it for the remake.
Crazy ass thing made me want to puke. And not just because of the presentation, but the content too. Ought to come with a warning. That ain't for kids.
Going back to the Honeybee, and I love the dance sequence with Andrea. I know you didn't like it so much, at least in terms of...
I loved the sequence, I hated the mechanics.
See, I think it's because I always aced it. I always got Andrea's earrings, and I was like, fuck, I've got a man crush on him. But yeah, no, he's fucking cool. He's just so cool.
really
He's
like
just
him.
one of those people that just seems to have his life sorted.
I think the only one out of the big three, or whatever they're called, that I didn't like was Chocobo Sam. He was just bland.
Yeah, he was.
Like, Madame M was wicked. She was awesome.
Oh yeah, Madame M
But-
is so cool.
Yeah,
I love her little temper tantrums.
You greedy bastard! Scum-sucking piece of shit-festering asshole!
And yet when she's so calm, she's like as calm as an ocean. It's amazing.
Yeah, that hand massage scene.
Did you do all three of them?
No, I just did one of them.
Which one did you go for?
The expensive one, the luxury one.
Right. Well, I went through all three of them because I played that chapter so many times to get the Dress to the Nines trophy. And at the time, I wasn't sure what the mechanics were to get the trophy, so I ended up doing all three different versions of the massage. So if you go for the medium one, she's kind of, oh, you get what you pay for kind of thing. So she's nice to him, but like she doesn't really care if he gets hurt a bit. Whereas on the expensive one, she's like, oh, a cry of pleasure. Whereas if you go for the poor man's, oh shit, she basically just beats him up. She's just like pulling it, like, ow, ow, ow. He's screaming at the end of it. It's fucking amazing.
Something else in Chapter 9 that I absolutely loved.
The Hell House.
It has the best boss reveal in the game. That was so cool.
It's just a house.
I had a feeling it was going to be in it because I saw an interview where they were like, we do want to get as many classic enemies in as possible, but we also need them to fit within the aesthetic of the game. Like, they need to look like they belong. So just having a house wandering around a slum's not going to look very good.
Yeah.
But how they managed to do it as well. It's similar to the boss at the end of the train graveyard. That was just a regular enemy in the train graveyard in the original, but they switched it up in this to make it a boss. And I think by doing that, it plays really good lip service to the original game, but adds a real new spin to it that I really appreciated.
Yeah.
I love that Hell House fight.
It was a really fun fight, but again, I can honestly speed through Chapter 9 now, and I've kicked the shit out of that house so many times now, it's not funny. I really enjoyed the Bahamut fight, actually, once I figured out how to do it. Once I knew I only had about 8 minutes to do it, it was just hound him with magic and as much as you can, and then kick the shit out of him, and it's fine. I regret that I didn't upload that to YouTube. Okay, so I know there's one person that you really want to talk about, and that's Rosh.
I love Rosh. Rosh is so good. Rosh, I can't remember how to say his name. I think it's Rosh. I love that guy. He is the best new character in the game. He is over the top. He rides his motorbike like a dancing horse. We don't see many soldiers, and again, that feels like a very Nomura thing, having another soldier in there. He's got the same sword that Zack uses, is in his soldier uniform. He's just so stupid, but that fight was so good. It's one of my favourite boss fights, that is.
Yeah.
I really like the one-on-one sword fights, because I can just parry them. But he's just such a cool character, and I was genuinely upset that he doesn't appear again in the rest of the game. Such a waste.
Yeah, but I think he's going to come back in another game. They're going to bring him back. They
so.
have to.
I do hope so, because I wanted him to be on the bike chase at the end of the game.
Because I felt that actually going to that bike chase, I felt really bad for Barrett actually, because he's deciding he's going to take down all his soldiers and said, no, you help Marlene, like now it's time that I help you. And then Cloud just comes along and steals his thunder. I was like, fuck you, Cloud. This is Barrett's moment. Let him have this. Don't get me wrong, I love the bike scene. I don't think they did it as well as they did in the original. I think like the build-up of the music and when you get the FMV sequence in the original was way cooler, and like Tiff was just like, everyone get out of here. Well, what about Cloud? Don't worry about him. And then you just see this cut of him going down the bike. That was way cooler.
Yeah, it was presented much better in the original.
And on this one, Barrett's about to have his moment to help Aerith. He's able to kind of finally thank her for what she's done for him. And then Cloud says, no, it's cool, I got this, guys. I'm just gonna... But then Rush does that, you know, he kind of steals the thunder as well. So, I mean, maybe that's just what they teach you at Soldier School.
Yeah, if you're going to ride a bike, thunder. You've got to steal the thunder.
Ride a bike, steal thunder.
There's a couple of other characters I don't really care about, like Oates, like the orphan kid. He's just annoying, he's rude to old people, but likes Cloud because he's thirsty for Aerith.
Yeah.
and Chadley, is it?
Chadley. I mean, my greatest wish is that once I did all the intel missions that I'd get to punch him in the face. I mean, it's just also the fact that, it's so hard to actually start talking to him. Like, even if you say, no, I'm just going to go from the menu, it's like, oh, I hope you're helping me with further missions. And you're like, just fucking let me just circle out of this, but you have to let him finish talking so I can go back to any menu, because otherwise it goes as a pause menu. Oh, just leave me alone. And breathe. Yeah. I didn't like Chadley at all. I actually quite liked Marl, the landlady.
Marl was awesome.
She's that kind of... everyone knows a Marl in their life.
Yeah. Mine was my grandma, and she was actually called Marl.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Which was great.
Yeah, I think I was probably like a friend's grandma for me, but yeah, everyone knows a Marl in their life, and everyone needs a Marl in their life. Someone who just clearly just sees things for what they are, and is just not afraid to say what they think and not afraid to kind of get down and dirty and help out, where needed. So I thought she was awesome.
Yeah, she really came through during the post-plate drop mission.
Yeah.
That's something else that this game does really well. It shows the devastation of the actions of Avalanche and Shinra at ground level in a way that we've never seen before. Because in the original, you do have to go from when Jesse blows the door out of the tunnel, you'd need to get to the station. And that's fine, but there's not many people about in the street. There's a little bit of debris and whatever, but no one's really paying attention. In this one, you see the devastation of the bomb. You hear people crying and saying, that's my house, my husband's in there, all this. And you just have to put your head down and walk through it. It's a harsh moment that really got me, but the same happened with the Sector 7 plate dropping and then going back to the slum to try and help find survivors and see what was, go to the bar. And that was like, yeah, our actions are what made this happen. Whereas in the original, it drops and then it blocks Sector 7 and then that's it. Within 20 minutes, you're climbing to the plate.
I think this is what I was saying on the previous video was, how they really talk about all angles of the moral compass as well, because, there's this whole thing about, like, what Shinra is saying, and they're not really wrong. I mean, like, first of all, yes, ignorance is bliss. Like, everybody knows where Mako comes from. Everybody knows that it's absorbing from the live stream. Just like in our world, everybody knows it comes from, sources that we should not really be touching anymore. But everyone is like, well, yeah, we know it sucks, but we wouldn't go back to that life. And so the president of Shinra says this to Cloud or to Barris, and he says, do you honestly think that you're going to win people's attentions, that you're literally going to get people going back to peasant days? They wouldn't. We've captured them now, and they wouldn't go back to that world even if you let them. And if you're giving people comfort, security, safety, which arguably Shinra did.
Nothing but a bunch of lies.
Except that Mako has made people's lives better.
It's made people blind to the cold hard truth.
So you want to talk about Leslie?
I really liked the story because at first he's really discouraging of the women going in there. He's really like, no, I wouldn't do it, guys. I love the way he chills Cloud out as well and saying, look, I wouldn't do that because if you start some shit in here, Cornea's going to hurt someone and that might be the girl that you're trying to save, or it might be another girl. He's really saying, look, this is not just a case of you going in and fighting, like someone else is going to get hurt, and this is what he does. And at first I was a bit like, look, it's really cool. It's that he's really trying to discourage these women from going in there. He's trying to prevent them from going to this fate. But at the same time, it's like, but he's still working for him. He's kind of aiding and abetting in a way, and he's kind of guilty by association in that respect. And by even being there, he's allowing this to happen, even though he's saying he doesn't. So I was like a bit bittersweet about him. But then when you find out his story, and then you find out why he's still there and actually why he's helping these guys and why he continues to help them, you really then understand, where he's coming from. And I think, they just did a fantastic job. It's a small character arc, but it's a character arc nonetheless, and he's the one that really comes through at the end, I think.
Yeah. He was one of those guys who's like, he's a villain, but he's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
I love the fact that at the end of it, the party gave him hope.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh no, she's gone, or this, they were like, she could still be out there.
She could still be out there.
Can never be sure how much someone means to you till they're gone. Don't give up on her yet.
I think like the whole Konea mansion though in general, I really enjoyed the chapter. I mean, how Cloud gets his dress is different, and how all three dresses you get are different.
I like that even though it was completely different, there were nods to the original. Like, giving the medicine to the guy with the stomach ache, and there was little allusions to it.
Yeah, totally. I know what you were saying before, like, when Tifa and Aerith don't get picks, you know, they're kind of thrown to the guys, and they do kind of do it in this one. Again, it's also been censored slightly, but I do really love the sequence where Tifa and Aerith actually go kick all the guys' asses.
I also love that this sequence filled a plot hole from the original game.
What was that?
How did Cloud and the girls have their weapons and everything when
Oh,
their
yeah.
dress is on? But in this, Leslie's like, Andrea told me what's happening. I bought you a gift. Like, here's your gear.
Yeah, go
And
get
then
them.
that's how they've got their swords and everything. I was like, this is great.
The sisterhood
I
of
enjoyed
Aerith and Tifa is amazing as well. They're just so cool. They really kind of get on with each other, and like Aerith clearly loves Tifa. She's like, yeah, you're like, yeah. I love how those two characters actually played off of each other and work together, and they go later on as well when they do certain bits together, like in Hojo's lab as well. Like those two fight together and they do a great job. And yeah, I really love those two working as a team, you know. And it's not kind of the boys and the girls necessarily, but they do a great job where they kind of maybe realizing that most of it is guys in this team, but they'll have their own little thing as well as working with the others.
I found it weird. Again, another change that they made to how the events play out in Corneo's mansion was they all get gassed and then dragged into the sex dungeon.
It's like, what was the point? They've gone there willingly.
Yeah, I was like, that was really weird. Because in the original, you just run down and you're in the sex dungeon and you just wait in. But in this one, it got really creepy.
Yeah, and then they're allowed to freely just go up to his room afterwards. You know, it's like, well, what was the point in that? I mean, apart from the sequence where Tifa realizes it's Cloud, and Cloud's like, nailed it, I know, thank you. But
Yeah,
other than that,
the delivery of that line was incredible.
it's great. Yeah.
Cloud? Is that you? Oh my god, that makeup and that dress!
Nailed it. I know. Thank you. Moving on.
So moving on slightly, but like other character that we haven't spoken about, the Turks.
There's not a lot to say about them. They weren't fleshed out in this, but they don't really get fleshed out in the original until Elena joins them.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you start seeing the relationship between them, and I was a bit sad that Quentin Flynn didn't do Reno's voice anymore, but then I rewatched Advent Children and went, no, it was the right idea. The voice cast in this game nailed it.
Yeah.
There was a bit that was weird to do with the Turks. It's on chapter 8 when you're taking Aerith home, and then you take her home, and the way that Elmira just turns around and goes, oh, Rue dropped by. Like, it wasn't harassment. They're just used to them popping in for a cup of tea. Whereas in the original, I always got the idea that they were like wolves just waiting outside the house. Like, they know where Aerith is and they're just waiting for a chance to grab her. They felt more threatening. Like when you see Reno, he gives up too easily. He's like, oh, come on, let's go. They were fine. They were just the Turks.
Yeah.
But there was no real changes to them.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll get fleshed out more in the sequel, but
I just wish we had more of their theme music in there because, you know, their theme was great. They did a great job in the music for this. And one thing I always loved about the Turks is that their theme always appears whenever they arrive. And in this case, it didn't. Like, they do it the first time and then they just have other music. And I think that was one of the only music criticisms I had because it's like, well, their theme is also very important for them in this one because it's like, oh, they're up to go good. You know, they're a bit of the Three Stooges in a way.
yeah, or a little bit like Team Rocket in Pokemon.
Yeah.
The thing in this is, in the first one, they felt like a threat. Whenever you'd hear the music and they'd come in, you'd be like, oh shit, like we're about to get a pretty tough boss battle, or the story's about to move forward, like something's going to happen. In this one, it was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know, Reno, I think you might be due for some R&R.
Nah, I'm good.
I just want to kind of go back to the Shinra Mansion. Something that you mentioned earlier was just some of the changes that they made actually going in. Now, I really liked actually using the grapple guns to get up and seeing how high you are before you even get on top of the plate. That was really cool. I think when you finally get to the Shinra building, they'd say, like, you know, we can go up the lift or we can go up the stairwell. And of course, in the original, they go up the stairwell. And
Oh no, in the original, you choose.
really? I've always gone up the stairwell.
No, you can storm the front or go around the back.
I must have always gone around the back then. I've played that game 4 times. I don't even remember it being a choice, but it's just such an iconic moment when you, like, it takes forever, of course, and you are literally just going round. But it's just so funny, like when you're just constantly making your way up.
I really enjoyed the Shinra building until I didn't. I loved going in and seeing the lobby. It looks so cool, and the lighting was great, and the music was great. And then when you finally get in and you're working your way up the floors, and there's little like homages to the original, like you see the big Midgar model, and you're going through a museum, which I thought was cool, because it's sort of like, and here's some exposition, because you're not going to get this for another 3 years. And I was like, all right, this is cool. And then you go into the air duct still, and you go and spy on them, and I was like, this is really cool, like this is good. But then it starts changing, and not for the better.
So this is the thing for me, because this is what you picked up on as well. And for me, like, there was a sequence where they get captured, so they get put in cells, and then they just get released, and then they walk out and there's just blood everywhere. And that's like the first, apart from the initial reference to Sephiroth with Cloud and Tifa, like in their childhood, apart from that, this is really the first reference to him. But yeah, that whole sequence was taken out, and I was really pissed off by that, because I just thought it was quite terrifying, like how they did it. And
I thought, like, I'm kind of glad that they took it out, but because it would have been weird. But the whole, in the original game where you see Red 13 for the first time, and Hojo's got him and Aerith in a jar.
Yeah.
And it is basically going, put a baby in her!
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm kind of glad that went, because it was really weird.
Yeah.
It was a really weird scene, and it would have been really odd now to see, like, Red 13, how he is, trying to put his red rocket in Aerith.
On second thought, maybe Frowden suits you better.
All things being considered, you know, I think they did a great job. I really loved going through Hojo's lab and playing through that sequence. You know, I thought it was actually really fun. I loved the little mini PHS system that they introduced.
That was so cool. It was such a nice little nod.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that. That was a cool chapter, I felt. I've seen people complaining about the dogs, saying that the dogs were too hard.
The one that I felt was too hard was that boss in that chapter. It starts off with Cloud and Barrett, and then it moves over to Tifa and Aerith, the big flying fish worm thing.
I don't know how I killed that. It just kind of died. There was no feedback from what you were doing. It was just kind of like tickling it to death, and then...
And actually it dies sooner than you think, because its health gauge doesn't even finish. It just like says, oh, I'm just going to go off and explode now.
Worst boss in the game, that was. Most forgettable boss.
Yeah.
Everything else was pretty bang on.
Yeah.
Well, we've done a lot of complaining.
Yeah, but I think like the thing is like we're kind of nitpicking, like, because we've given a lot of the love in the last one, and I think again, you know, as we said like in the last video, I mean, this is a solid 9 out of 10 game, and I think absolutely. We're really kind of talking about that why it didn't get to a perfect 10. I mean, when we talk about how big the game is and like how enjoyable the game is and how so much there is to love about this game, like I think if we kind of just sat and talks about like everything that was amazing with this, it's like we're kind of waxing lyrical on what everybody already knows. And I think, you know, these are just like the little nitpicky things for us that could just be a little bit better. But generally, like, everything that we mentioned is pretty much all there is, and for a game as big as it is, it's actually not that much at all.
Yeah. What really threw me through a loop was when it does open, because it's a very linear game. It's very restrictive. And I don't like the fact that you try and go down here and then it'll put up a barrier. And it's like, no, you've got to go that way.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I want to go that way. But as soon as you regain control, I think around 14, around chapter 14, and you can run from Sector 4 to Sector 6.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not a long run. And it's a very straight corridor. And it's the team that worked on the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, which are known for just being corridors. So it's 10, really. But I didn't have a problem with it, because it was a kind of linear section from a game anyway.
I think Midgar itself was fairly linear anyway in the original. Like, there's only so many places you can go, and you're kind of blocked off from going to many areas for various reasons. So I don't think that's really that much of an issue for me. I didn't have a problem with it being fairly linear in that respect.
I just got annoyed when, like, after the church, you know, there's a materia in the church.
Yeah.
So you climb down the roofs, you go to run back. In the original, you can just go back to the church.
Yeah.
In this one, it puts up a barrier and goes, no, you got to keep moving forward. I'm like, I just want to go and get the materia.
Yeah.
And then the only time that you can do that later on is to run all the way from 6.
Mm.
I didn't appreciate that at all. But again, nitpick, because everything else just worked great, I feel.
Yeah, totally.
You worry too much. I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
So, I mean, what we were talking about at the beginning is like how I think they are going to change many things. One thing I was thinking about, though, there's probably some positives in this as well, though. I do think that despite them changing the course of what happens, I do think it's still going to follow many key beats.
It has to.
You're going to see most of these locations. Maybe not all of them. They, as you said, they may find a way out of getting the world map and keep it as a linear game. The jury's out for me about whether that's a good idea or not, but I think it's still an interesting idea. And I think you're going to see Juneau, you're going to see Cosmo Canyon, you're going to see the North Rock.
Wutai will be mandatory.
Wutai will be mandatory, and I think many of these places will obviously be bigger as well, because some of them are quite small towns that you don't really spend that much time in. You're definitely going to see Gold Saucer. I mean, they've discussed many of these places. You got the Cosmo Canyon drink.
You got the little Moogle kid.
Yeah, Jessie wants to go to Gold Saucer. That was originally her plan, was to be a performer at the Gold Saucer. Oh, and they also talk about the space program that they cancelled. And obviously you'll see Sid, because he was obviously the person that says, oh yeah, like I was supposed to go to space, and then Shenmue cancelled the whole program. And they do actually talk about this in this game. So I do think that, yeah, they'll definitely show you and take you to most of the places that are in the game. I think it's mostly the events that are going to be different. There's a few things I won't miss if they take out, like the whole kind of battle you need to do to get one of the huge materials on the Eagle.
Yeah, that's going to be like tower defense, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that if they take them out, I'm really not going to miss them, like in favor of story.
I'll be happy to just get the Phoenix materia from the kid.
Yeah.
A pleasure to see you again, Cloud. How can I be of service?
There's something that we haven't even touched on.
What's that?
Zack's alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna have huge ramifications.
Yeah, so I've always struggled. Now, I've played this game from 1997 to last Christmas, like 4 times now. I know many hardcore people have played it many more, but I still don't understand Cloud's origins. Now, when I say that, I mean, Hojo is like, Clouds, you are basically just one of the Sephiroth clones. Basically, like, he's kind of alluding that he was manufactured by Shinra, and, he's molded by Genova, and that's all Cloud is. And then Cloud basically takes ages kind of coming to terms with this and saying, oh, okay, that's all I am. I'm basically not even human. I'm basically this. But then you have the whole sequence of the Mako poisoning and Medeal, and Tifa stays by his side and then goes into his psyche. And she essentially says to him, well, actually, no, you must have existed because I know that you were a child in my childhood. Now, yes, it's true that you weren't actually in Soldier, and actually the reveal was that Zack was the Soldier and that you were really just a Shenmue officer, and I just didn't have the heart to tell you that that's not what happened. And I always found it really strange that they never questioned that from Cloud either, when he's talking about the whole history that Tifa's not like, actually, that's not what happened, it was this dude. I never really understood, okay, well, what is the true origin of Cloud? Because some people are like, no, you're definitely this. Some people are like, you're definitely that. Now, going back to Zack, in the game, you meet Zack's parents, and they kind of allude to Aerith, and that Zack had a girlfriend, and that's Midgar. And of course, in this version, for sure, Aerith is talking about, does you know anyone else in Soldier? Did you have any war buddies? And he says, oh, not really. And she's like, oh, okay, that's a bit sad. But then she says, actually, I did know someone, in Soldier, and he was the first person I loved. And then when you see at the end of this game, you see Zack and Aerith cross paths. So I think that the fact that Zack's alive, I think like he and Aerith are now going to meet.
Do you know Cloud's origin story?
Go on, tell me.
Crisis Core. It's all explained there.
Is it actually though?
Yeah, it's all there, because Crisis Core is the story of Zack.
Right.
And it ends with Zack having a face-off against Shinra's army.
Which is presumably the moment you see in the end of this.
It's an unwinnable fight. You can keep going and keep going and keep going, but you can't win.
Yeah.
and then you get gunned down eventually. But then at the end of this one, you see that moment,
Yeah.
but then you see him get up and go, was that the last of them?
Right.
I'm getting kind of split timeline vibes in the same way. Did you play Final Fantasy VIII?
Yes, I did.
Whenever Squall goes to sleep,
Yeah.
and then you play as, what's his name? I have a feeling it's going to be like that. We'll probably play as Zack in the sequel for a flashback sequence or two. There's a lot of questions that I think, again, comparing it to Kingdom Hearts, because Final Fantasy VII story was always weird anyway, and now it's just been taken to another level of odd.
Yeah.
And I'm in two minds about it, because as much as I was enjoying everything from the original game in the remake, there was a lot of it that I hadn't seen before because it wasn't there before. And I thought it was nice to still be surprised by a story that I know better than most stories I know.
Yeah.
I've played 7 so many times. I have a 7 tattoo on my back. I've been playing it since 1997. It's one of my favourite games. And I was still being surprised in the remake. Now, with all these changes that they've made, veterans and newcomers are on the same page.
Well, not entirely, because again, if we have same key beats, we'll still be familiar with the locations that we're going to. That would be the only difference.
But all the things that's happening with Zack, we have no idea. And it's nice to go into this with as much knowledge as like my girlfriend, who is playing Final Fantasy VII for the first time at the minute. She doesn't know. And we're going to approach the next game with the same knowledge, like what is going to happen. And I think it's brave to do that to a story that's loved by everyone. Like I said in the last video, it didn't stick the landing for me at all, but I am excited to see where it's going to go.
But I think, again, this could have all been resolved if they didn't call it a remake.
Yeah. If they would have just given it a subtitle. Eurogamer saying if the next one was called Final Fantasy VII The Unknown Journey, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's a weird one, because you look at the Avengers, and Infinity War started off as Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2, but then Part 1 became Infinity War, Part 2 became Endgame.
Yeah.
And I feel if they would have done something like that with this, and just had Final Fantasy VII, the beginning, and then you go, oh, is it a remake? Yes, it is. Oh, no, there's changed bits. This makes sense now. And then the next one, call it The Unknown Journey, because we're all going into this weird place together.
One thing is, if they do go straight to Calm at the beginning of the next game, which is logically the only place they can go, we should find out some backstory stuff soon anyway, and it would be interesting to see whether, like, Cloud is talking about the backstory, because this is where we see the whole sequence of Sephiroth and everything, so we'll kind of get that at the very beginning. Theoretically, it'd be interesting to see how in the original game, like, it was almost like information was fed into Cloud's head whenever he had one of those distortion moments, and it would be interesting to see if his memory of things versus the new version with Zack surviving will kind of correct itself in his memory of stuff.
You brought up a good point. It's going to be weird going into the next game, because this one starts with a bang. It starts and you're instantly in control of Cloud, and you're instantly cutting people down, and within 20 minutes you're fighting a boss. Like, it's real balls to the wall pacing for the beginning of the game. The next one is going to have to start in Calm, because imagine starting it outside of Midgar and then going, come on lads, let's go, and then walking to Calm for the beginning of the game. It's going to be weird to have one game start off with literally an explosion, and then have the next one start off with everyone sitting around in an inn going, do you remember when me and Tifa were kids? That was weird, wasn't it? That man in fire, a big sword. Gotta say, Sephiroth turning around in the fire is the Final Fantasy equivalent of seeing Batman's parents get shot now.
Yeah.
They shoehorn it into fucking everything.
I know.
It's a great scene. It looks good, but there's such a thing as too much of a good thing.
I agree. I think no, like, considering that they'll pad it out like in a good way, but I do think they'll find a way to have some sequence to kind of before you get to Calm, I think. But either way, Calm will be early. So I think we'll see that sequence fairly early, but then maybe they don't want that to happen too soon, so maybe they'll deviate us and, oh, we should go to Calm, but maybe let's go to this place first. But it's going to be years before we find out, and that's the frustrating part. But the other thing is like, this does kind of give like Square a license to do fewer games. Like, if they could arguably just say, well, actually, this is now just a 2-part game.
Yeah.
And because we change the story, we can get away with it. Or, you know, a 3-part game, you know, but if we're looking at about sort of 3-4 years between each game, you know, in fact we'll be in our fucking mid-40s and PS6 will be nearly out by the time that you know, by the time that we're nearly done with this whole journey. It's
that's scary. That is. I don't like that at all.
No. So I do wonder if they're going to try and simplify some things as well. Like bring out some areas, but I think they will lose some areas. Like, you know, like Costa del Sol's great, but do we need it?
Almost there, Cloud. We're almost there.
So that's it for our spoiler talk of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, have you played it? What do you think? If you haven't played it, why are you watching the spoiler talk? That's weird. It's ruined everything for you. So thank you for joining two 30-somethings moaning about a game that they actually really enjoy. There's a lot of bitching in this.
It's because we care. It's
we
because
do it
we care.
we do it
It's
out of
tough love.
Yeah. So have you played it? What do you think? Was the changes that you enjoyed changes that you thought were bad? Did you agree with the Kingdom Hearts comparisons that myself and many other people are making? Let us know in the comments below. Join us over at Twitter at GameCupboardUK, and yeah, stick around. Plenty more videos like this to come from. Hopefully a little bit shorter, because these are going to take me a long time to get out. But thank you very much for watching. If you've been with us throughout the whole video, you're an absolute superstar. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.